We're 3 episodes into It's a Sin, Russell T Davies' 2021 drama following 5 friends in London during the height of the AIDS epidemic in the United Kingdom. As with our discussions on the first 2 episodes, for most of this discussion we'll just be talking episode 3, but at the very end of the discussion we'll have a clear transition and then a Sin spoiler zone, where we discuss episode 3 in context of, and with spoilers for, or 5 episodes of the series. But for now, discussing episode 3, our episode set in 1986, will be myself, Neo from Australia, joined by Ingiga from England and Tomtit from Australia. What did you guys think of this 3rd episode?
Well, it was pretty much felt surgically designed to be as sad and devastating as possible. I'm sure everyone who watched it feels the same way. Pretty much an episode mostly devoted to one extremely sad event, and it did its job and then some.
Yeah, I felt this episode was quite intimately focused on obviously the main emotional arc, but also with Richie's intertwined a little bit as well, kind of getting the other end of the focus, and then the other characters sort of filtering to the edges a bit again. So rather than having lots of narrative fireworks or stuff going on, maybe like the previous episode did, this one was quite focused, and yeah, I felt it was a more low-key affair, but it had really, I'd say, some really nice touches to it. So yeah, it was a really good episode.
What did we think of Colin's new job at the print shop, where he gets his shiny set of keys?
Well, it's just so endearing that like he manages to be he finds the joy in opening the store, and especially considering he just lost that really fancy job where he gets to go to New York and be a tailor with Taylor's assistant. Even in light of that, he still finds the wonder in like this really mundane job. And that, I think that's really key to this episode, is that like RTD knows how to make effective tragedy, is that you don't have everything be doom and gloom. You need like the lighter moments, and those are what really kill you in the end. Just like, you know, everything surrounding the goodness of Colin's mother, and without like the lighter touches, I think it wouldn't be as powerful as it is.
In addition, the fact that Colin is so content, and so, you know, he's so content with his lot, and he's so not that he has low standards, but rather he is capable of finding the joy in anything. The fact that it makes him so pure, perhaps so innocent and so joyful, you know, enhances the reason it enhances the sadness, because it makes it even worse that someone so good, someone who didn't even want that much, someone who didn't demand much from the world, nonetheless gets shat on so mercilessly by fate.
I think the families of the main characters play such an important part in the show in contextualizing who these main boys and girl are. With Colin's mother, I thought she was such an interesting presence, that really warm, maternal kind of soul. And a scene I really adored was when she was sitting down with Colin to have dinner, and she starts talking about Colin's friend group and how she likes them. And you can see this very gentle kind of probing she's doing, leading up to where she kind of contrives a fairly organic way. She can say, "They're a queer little lot, aren't they?" I think that's nice. What did you guys think of that scene and the way the mother approached that?
I think it was really well written, in that she's clearly... It came across to me like she really was not an expert in this. Like, she didn't exactly know how to broach that topic, but she did the best she could. And that in its own way has like a super endearing quality to it. And just that actor playing Colin's mother was so well cast, because even in the phone call that she did in episode 1, when I saw that for the first time, I was like, oh, she seems really nice. And I thought, I really, really hope she's not homophobic. And I think RTD kind of plays a little bit on that tension where like you want this woman to be as nice as she clearly presents herself as. And thankfully she is that nice and lovely, and yeah, possesses that maternal quality in spades.
Yeah, I think it adds a quality of realism that not all the parents are going to be homophobic, even though that would be more the expectation in this period in Britain.
I guess just on the subject of Colin's mother now, it kind of raises the question of where Colin's father is. And I guess that could be said to kind of inform like Colin's mother, which is whatever sequence of events led her to have her husband or partner not be in her life, perhaps made her a more empathetic person, or she knows how to, you know, cherish cherish what she has in life more than some of the other parents can. So I think that's an interesting choice.
Andrea Doherty, she is a powerhouse.
They're a nice little gang, your mates. I like them. They're nice. And they're funny. A bit different, aren't they? I was thinking they're a queer little lot, I suppose.
What's that? Women? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You've come to an expert there. What's your problem?
Well, I think that's nice.
Oh, have you tried? Yeah.
You know, we'd be doing the scenes in the house, and like I couldn't get through the scenes. Like, you know, they were difficult. Like, because Andrea is so maternal. Like, it was moments on set where you just go like, "Fuck! Like, this isn't supposed to feel this way. Like, it's supposed to be acting, but it felt more like reality." Do you know what I mean? Sometimes because it's just Russell's written it so well.
See, the bit with Colin's mother that really stuck out for me is that when she's being informed for the first time that Colin has AIDS, and that guy in the corner is being quite homophobic and horrible, and she doesn't react to like the homosexuality element at all. She's just like she's just constantly probing this thing of like, why can't he leave? You know, why can't he get out? You know, and the fact that her number one priority is her son's safety and freedom, and she just doesn't even like take a moment to be shocked by anything about, you know, AIDS or homosexuality or anything like that. I think that's like one of those character revealing moments where I think we see how the only thing that matters to her is her love for her son, rather than any of the stuff that's being thrown at her otherwise. Like, they're kind of like oh, your son's in a cesspit, that's just a distraction, when the reality here is that she just wants him to not be treated like dog shit, basically. I think that really made me love her. I think the fact that she's just, you know, so he can't get out. She's just, you know, just uncomprehending of any of the kind of bullshit that's being thrown at her. At one point, when they said the only thing stopping her from taking him out was the law and the law of the land, I thought it might be like, it might lead to an End of Time style like rescue sequence where she just, you know, storms out of there wheeling Colin along or something like that. But yeah, it was not to be. But I think that idea of the law being like completely powerless in the face of, you know, the actual like the familial love, I think that was, yeah, it's an interesting idea.
I love that intersection between what's called the law, what actually is the law, and just the vibe of a time and of a nation, and the ways those don't always map completely onto each other, with how we got that lawyer character explaining what those people essentially trapping Colin were doing didn't really map onto the actual practice of the law, but it's something that felt lawful because the society was so homophobic and there was such of that fear of AIDS that it seemed like what would actually happen or what actually should be happening, even though that wasn't to the letter of the law. I found that a really interesting point about the time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they hadn't actually done their homework, so to speak. They didn't actually bother checking whether they were even using the up-to-date regulations. They were just... because they felt they were dealing with, I don't know, the scum of society or whatever, they just felt entitled to sort of wing it and go with these out-of-date regulations. So, yeah, it's interesting. What did you guys actually think of Elizabeth, that lawyer character? Because when she came in, kind of doing the whole badass walk and giving her big speech to the epic music and stuff, I was kind of wondering, like, if it was gonna suddenly turn out to lead to some sort of ironic reversal where actually their big speech moment doesn't succeed at all. But then, of course, it does, and Colin is released. So it was more of an actual straightforward hero moment for that character and kind of a positive force. Like, obviously, I can tell RTD is sort of showing how there were like sources of goodness and hope and people who were willing to help them out, and that was like that's really important. I was just interested, like. The performance of that character felt quite mannered, I think is the word I'm looking for. Do you guys know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of Jill-esque quality to that character, the lawyer Elizabeth, in how straightforwardly heroic they are. But she wasn't based on a specific real person the way that Jill was. However, the character was riffing on some real events, real legal issues, real legal fights based around similar circumstances, like the one Colin found himself in, being imprisoned in this episode.
I think just for the drama, I think the decision that Colin is successful in being let out and being reunited with his family was a really smart one, because like obviously to have him remain sequestered, that would be the sadder thing to happen, but having him let out is really sort of more tragic because you get to see sort of those heartbreaking interactions But yeah, it's that light and shade thing again that RTD has really well. You need the moments of humanity.
I feel like, I mean, I obviously I don't know the spoilers for the remaining 2 episodes, but I feel like we might not see that Elizabeth character again. She feels like a character who maybe turns up for that one bit, and then that's sort of like the encapsulation of kind of what she represents in the story. So maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. Don't don't spoil me. But it's interesting kind of self-contained scene there. It struck me that what ends up happening to Colin and the way in which he starts to go, as Jill puts it, senile like old people. It struck me that the way we've sort of seen Colin beforehand is that he was almost like the old man of the group already, if only because he maybe dressed a bit old-fashionedly, maybe he was a bit kind of like cuddly, a bit of a sort of like modest kind of not quite granddad figure, but do you know what I mean? Sort of the character who seems like older than he actually is. He's very young, but he kind of gives off that.
He embodies the version of youth that like adults want young people to be. Like he's basically an adult in training. That's sort of the person he is, but obviously in his own lovely way.
Yeah, so the fact that the way he ultimately ends up is something that is very much like an old person, who's dying and kind of losing their grip, and that very awkward scene where he starts masturbating in front of Richie and he kind of making those overt sexual comments and stuff. Like, I mean, anyone who's when you're kind of dealing with old people who are maybe losing their minds and stuff, it's kind of that uncomfortable thing where obviously it's not their fault, and you kind of are like, I just felt there was an interesting symmetry in the way that which the character whose youth was perhaps kind of maybe a different kind of youth, as Tom Tit described, ultimately ends up kind of becoming almost an actual old man in his death. Does that if I'm making any sense?
Yeah, I think that's part of the tragedy of AIDS, is how it accelerates this journey of life down so quickly. And you get people in their 20s or younger getting cancers or like dementia that by all rights it should be only the elderly getting, if anyone. It's that tragedy of that unfulfilled life getting struck down by things that are meant to happen when you've already lived your life and you've already had all your experiences. I think like the dementia kind of stuff hits so hard because that's a lot of people can relate to that kind of stuff with family members or whatnot. I was absolutely crushed by that scene where he started masturbating in front of Richie. It's just such a ugly, sad, awful, very human Russell T Davies type moment. And I think it's what really struck me about that was it's like Colin has this extra kind of dignity some of the other characters don't have, in that he is, like you described it, as like an old man, and it's like he's more proper than the other ones in some ways. He is a bit more reserved about himself, and he carries himself in a way that kind of accords more with society. He wears suits and he's very polite. He's like what Tom said, he's like what adults might want younger people to act like. So he always had this extra dignity about him that the other characters didn't have, with their being more flamboyant and owning their own personalities more and being more exuberant. And it's not just that they were stripped away, but it's like when you lose the self-inhibition that you have, from getting that kind of dementia, just to have all that gone. Like for Richie, can't think of him as he used to after that. He can't think of him as just that nice, softly spoken, reserved boy anymore. He can't do that after the things that by right should stay inside your head and other people not know about you, for that all to come spilling out in such a visceral form. But yeah, that reminded me a lot of like the stuff that happens when relatives get dementia and things that maybe shouldn't get said spill out, and it's just such a awful human experience. I found that so crushing, that scene.
At the same time, with that confession that Colin makes that he always fancied Richie, there's I think there's a sense to which, as much as it's deeply uncomfortable for all of them, the fact that this guy who was so reserved and repressed is at this worst of moments is sort of finally, I don't know, like kind of admitting, like, or kind of being open, obviously even to a very uncomfortable and inappropriate degree, but like the fact that he's letting out this part of him that was always kind of concealed before. It's like it's like there's something poignant about it as well, like the fact that he was human, like in that way too,
What it kind of makes me think of in that sense is when someone's a little bit drunk and their inhibitions are lowered a bit, they'll start opening up in some ways that might be endearing, like saying how much they care for people, how much they like people. And it's nice that their inhibitions have been lowered enough to break down the social realities a little bit. And then if someone gets well and truly extremely drunk, it might go beyond that to when they start making, a fool of themselves and they start being disgusting because they've lost so many of their inhibitions. I felt like that scene kind of progressed from, oh, it's nice Colin's opening up and he's less inhibited, and that's kind of sweet that he had a crush on Richie. That's kind of nice, and we're going to think of him even better in a way, and then it just kept escalating to a point where, that's less the impression. It got uncomfortable.
I guess from Richie's end as well, the scene was really sort of complicated because that scene, it sort of plays on the, I think, somewhat universal discomfort with receiving compliments. I guess unless you're like a complete narcissist, then you just soak it all in. I think in most people, there's a little bit of discomfort when, someone sort of gushes about them. And for Richie especially, because he's shown in this episode to be a little bit up himself. Because when they talk about Colin getting the disease and they say it could affect anybody, Richie immediately sort of jumps to, no, don't worry everyone, I'm okay, and it's all about him. And I think Richie is aware of that own flaw that he has on some level. So for him to just receive this torrent of adoration, I think it's making him a little bit uncomfortable too. And I think Ollie Alexander does a really good job of playing that in that scene.
Especially with the degree to which they emphasised that Richie had never really paid enough attention to Colin, I think, or really never really acknowledged him properly. In that scene you just mentioned, Richie's like, oh, well, Colin never had it off with anyone, and then Roscoe's like, don't be stupid, of course he did, right? Colin's not some pure, virginal abstract idea, also the fact that I think Colin says in that scene by the bedside, did you never notice that I liked you? And kind of Richie's never even remotely considered such a thing before, because Colin was just maybe kind of like a joke figure, I think, to Richie to some extent. So Richie's being confronted with the more of the full humanity of Colin with a situation that he'd never really factored in before, because as you say, he's so self-involved.
It's not spoken on much, but I like the little relationship between Roscoe and Colin living in the same room and all. I think there's a nice little respect there that bubbles up in that scene.
I think Roscoe in particular is someone who Colin really looks up to, because Roscoe's come from a really difficult background, and for Roscoe it's his family, and I think for Colin it's where he's from, and I think them two, it's not, I don't think it's purely a fluke that they end up sharing a room together. I think those two characters share something deeper than just happening to share a room together. They, Roscoe, talks fondly of Colin a lot of the time in the show, and as does Colin.
Interestingly, we saw Roscoe really grieving and sobbing in his room, after he'd bagged up all the stuff, and I think it's an interesting contrast with Roscoe sobbing there compared to his kind of dismissal of what happened to Gloria in the previous episode. Obviously, it wasn't the same situation, but I think, and also the fact that Roscoe is kind of on his own in this episode in his room, sobbing away, I think maybe there's an extent to which it shows how he's only willing to fully let out that grief in private, perhaps, rather than and whereas he lets down the front that he has up perhaps the rest of the time. So he's not as emotionally detached as perhaps we might have been led to believe by the previous episode.
Roscoe's a really interesting character. It's like he has a kind of charmed life where he just falls into such good situations. I mean, he manages the bar, and obviously he starts ingratiating with Stephen Fry's character in this episode. And I can't help but think it sort of stems as a consequence or a positive consequence, rather, of just how magnificent his coming out was in episode 1. Because Colin and Richie, they don't really have these spectacular coming out scenes in the way that Roscoe does. And it's almost like that action in episode 1 has sort of put a cloud of good luck over him.
I think it's what you said in our episode 2 discussion, Tom, that the show almost seems to have this kind of karmic reward system if you own up to your emotions and you don't repress anything. It's almost like the show rewards you, whereas if you push emotions down or try to deny them, it's like the show kind of strikes you down a little bit.
Yeah, I think Colin's sort of complete lack of cowardice or shame or whatever, and when it comes to just completely confidently walking into any situation and kind of playing it to his advantage, I think it's you can say it's kind of like a good luck, and obviously it is because it's an authorially contrived situation, but also, like, from a character perspective, it's the fact that he is capable of, the fact that as a person, he's capable of exuding such confidence that people just, like, go along with him, I think is also, like, how he's able to get into, you know, situation after situation and kind of, like, play everything to his advantage. And obviously, I do expect this will go wrong for him at some point, but, you know, we'll see. I felt his little scenes with Cassius and Stephen Fry's MP character in this episode, it was kind of like, I mean, two little, basically, I don't know, funny scenes weren't really integrated into, like, the main story of the episode, more like set up for what I presume will happen in the next episode. So it felt maybe a little bit superfluous, but, you know, it was an amusing thing to have in there.
I thought the way Omari Douglas ran out of the room, I think it was when he was going to have a shower with Cassius, was one of the best, like, exits of a scene that I've seen in recent memory. That I think Douglas has such a great, like, physicality in his performance. It's, yeah, extremely good.
Yeah, whenever he's walking around, it's you can always tell. Like, I love how much thought he's clearly put into the way he moves.
With Stephen Fry and Neil Patrick Harris in the first episode, I think it's interesting how I think these big names are used quite cannily because they can be placed prominently on the marketing materials. You know, these are recognizable names. Americans will love Neil Patrick Harris because of How I Met Your Mother. Stephen Fry's famous in general. I like how we have those names to kind of get people in, and then pretty much the rest of the cast, except for Ollie Alexander, since he's a pop star, is much lower key. I think that helps you really immerse in the show, which is important in period dramas where there can be that distancing factor. I guess Stephen Fry's character is interesting. Is he the sort of type you thought he would play in the show?
Yes, I would say almost exactly to a T. He sort of gravitates towards these, you know, pompous authority figures, at least in the things I've seen him in. You know, he was in The Hobbit, wasn't he? And he was like some sort of local...
Master of Lake Town, yes.
Yes. But yeah, no, he basically did what I expected him to, performance and character-wise.
Something that amuses me with these stars in terms of the Roscoe and Stephen Fry interaction and the Colin and Neil Patrick Harris interaction is with the latter. In the first episode, Colin's actor says it was very easy to play those scenes because Colin's actor had a real adoration of Neil Patrick Harris, so he was barely even acting when he, like, looks in adoration at, wow, there's a game in here I can aspire to. That was, like, coming from the real actor.
Neil is just like, he's a magician, like, he really is. He's a wizard. Like, what he can do is just something, like, I don't think I'll ever get over, and it's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Like, I remember the first day on set, and, like, I know Peter like remembers this too because we talked about it, like, later on when we were filming, and just, like, seeing how Neil works, like, and how that's home for him, like, being on a set and playing characters is something that I'll never forget. Like, that first moment being on set with him, and he was so generous, like, so nice to me, and I felt like he made it so easy then to, like, because obviously, like, the way the relationship is, he made it so easy to play because I was constantly just in awe of him. So yeah, that, you know, he's amazing. He's absolutely amazing.
But with Roscoe and Stephen Fry, I don't feel like there's this adoration or respect. I feel like it's a much more of a equalized, combative thing.
Yeah, it's interesting, the two sides, I suppose. Like, Neil Patrick Harris is playing this very confident, very self-actualized, very sort of very this maybe idealized kind of figure, and whatever's going on with Stephen Fry, which I don't entirely know what's going on there yet, but I feel like the fact that he's got some sort of weakness that Roscoe can exploit, and he's kind of haggardly showing up in his underwear at the door or whatever, I feel like it's interesting showing, like, the two sides of the adult world, so to speak, in contrast to the young main characters. And I think it's cool that these big guest stars are kind of at the periphery slightly, kind of at these figures from kind of the grown-up world, kind of orbiting the central five mains. It's yeah, I like how it's all positioned.
There's a sense of authenticity with Colin that I think prevents him from feeling like a stock character the way that, you know, a very polite, formally closeted young gay man in suits all the time might invite. And I think part of that is down to how much of the character is drawn from showrunner Russell T Davies himself. Of course, RTD is joyous and exuberant and flamboyant now, but when he was Colin's age, when he was in the 1980s, he says of himself, "I must have known hundreds of lads like them, like the boys of the Pink Palace. But though we all had those mad nights on the town, I was lucky. I escaped HIV. I was rather more well-behaved than my characters. That's why I write them doing what they do. But in the 1980s, I kept my head down and worked a lot. I didn't start going out properly on the gay scene until I was in my 30s, in the 90s. Also, during the whole decade, the 1980s, I was determined to become a writer, and everyone told me it was the path to poverty and I'd end up freezing in an attic, so I was saving my money, always with my intention of leaving regular work and becoming a writer." But the kind of counterpoint to that is Colin wasn't just... Colin wasn't what Richie was thinking of him as, like we said earlier. He wasn't not having sex, he wasn't a virgin. In fact, that wasn't the case at all.
The trickiest bit in the whole series, I think, comes in episode 3, where it took a lot of nerve to write, and I had a lot of doubt about writing it, and I tried not to do it, and then I thought it was a good idea. It's basically that there's a whodunit around who slept with Colin, about how Colin contracted the HIV virus.
Colin can't have AIDS. He's never had it off with anyone.
Don't be stupid, of course he has.
He's never said.
Well, when did you actually talk to him instead of taking the piss?
You know, it then gets revealed that he was having sex with his landlady's son all those years ago, which I think is very true. There's something very true in that. There's a lot of closeted men who will have a sex life and not tell anyone about it. What I worried about was making that whodunit in a show that's being very sober. I literally sat here thinking at this desk, thinking, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. I did do it. Sometimes you have to take a deep breath and do these things. I like it now. Actually, now at the end result, I'm very pleased. I think it closes Colin's story off beautifully. But out of all the things that happen in this show, that is the one I worried about the most.
What did you think of the kind of mystery and nonlinear element of how related revelations to Colin's sex life were played out?
I felt that final reveal was really, I think, maybe my favourite thing about the episode. I felt it was really savvy, and I think something felt very human and very poignant about it. To contrast Colin's, demise and his death with what was ultimately this reveal of a part of him that, he wasn't like this abstract, pure, virginal, angelic figure. He had desires just like anyone else. And obviously there's the element that he was clearly taken advantage of by this toxic asshole in the football shirt, but also like, it was consensual as well. Like, Colin was someone with desires. Colin was someone who had a sex life. Colin was someone who was capable of that. And I think the fact that only at the end do we get this reveal that Colin was just as like complete, shall we say, as anyone else. Colin just had that raw humanity, just like anyone else. I feel. But of course, tragically, that was what spelt his death, even though, it wasn't fair for that to happen. I think, I'm trying to put my finger on what it is, but I think that contrast of the utter innocence of Colin and what he did, and the fact that it wasn't wrong, really, for him to, have had a sex life, for him to have had desires, but also to show that he paid for it so dearly. I think it makes him feel full, like it makes him feel complete, like there's an actual story of a life being told here, like, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't know.
You remember.
Yeah, remembers everything, don't you?
I think he does.
It's not just like here's a twist, there's a bit we didn't show you. It's really filtered actually through Colin's character. It's, he remembers everything, and then we go to him, and then we are in his mindset of remembering everything, even as he's in this very sick state. So I think that the way the mystery is kind of revealed there feels like good storytelling because it's so baked into Colin's actual status at the moment.
It was extremely well executed because, what you said before, Gig, about Colin being complete as a person, I also think it's key to a certain extent that Colin getting the disease was, we might have been set up to expect that he got it from like what we might call the gay world, so like the clubs and the going out at night and stuff, but actually he got it from an experience which he had in the so-called straight world, which obviously he was not having sex with a straight man, but it's obviously the mother is homophobic and he's in the closet, and it's this very sort of straight masculine environment, so it shows that it can come from anywhere, and it's actually possibly more dangerous coming from somewhere like there because Colin has this abuse leveled at him, and it's just like a horrible way to have sex for the first time, because I think I think there was a point in the episode 2 where it's made clear that he hadn't had sex before that moment, which I think adds an extra layer of tragedy to it. I guess as we talked about in the spoiler zone for episode 1, it's also the structure of it, which is like it's this memory resurfacing which had been sort of blocked out, whether it's because of his own self-denial or because of the actual state of his mental faculties because of the disease. But just the idea of it resurfacing is so sort of devastating.
See, it's interesting that while the other characters are kind of dismissing stuff that Colin says in his state because he's kind of talking nonsense, talking about like there was a little man, I am the arm and I sound like this, and sort of saying all and kind of saying stuff that they don't really understand. But he brings up when he brings up the football shirt to them, he's very lucid because he remembers precisely what happened. He like that, and that part was actually true. But nonetheless, that the others will never know that because they don't know like the truth. It's only us from our viewer's perspective, our sort of omniscient perspective, that we kind of see the full picture. It was interesting that we see the homophobic mother kind of storming in at the end and denying that her son could ever be one of those filthy queers. There was and obviously that the fact she's there means obviously that her son has come down as well. So it's I don't want to say karmic, but there's a degree of like, well, not like serves you right or anything, but the fact that these very homophobic characters and this guy who called Colin a bender and gave him HIV and stuff, there's a degree to which like we see how it's not just the lovely people like Colin who are kind of as much as Jill says don't look for a villain, which is obviously a very good point, and she makes it at a very opportune moment just before we get a character who viewers are very likely to view as a villain. I think there's a degree of which I don't want to say Schadenfreude. Do you know where I'm coming from?
Yeah. I think that the sense of karmic forces at place in the show is very real, and I think it works very interestingly in the storytelling because it's not all unified as in the homophobes are getting punished. I think we have these competing senses of karma because even the show's very title calls to mind, it's a sin. This is like constantly hanging over the scenes of the gay men having exuberant fun as they should be and enjoying life as they should.
Let me just, last question to you is the title, It's a Sin. Because, obviously there's a religious component about it. If you follow this path, it's a sin. And if you follow this path, you're a righteous person. And yet we're discovering that sometimes those paths intersect, and it doesn't necessarily equate that just because if you love somebody, that's a sin.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, the whole notion of sin is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And I like the title because it hangs over the entire cast like a judgment, because this is about a drama about a bunch of gay men in a flat and their friends having a wonderful time. There's a lot of life and laughter and colour and sexiness. And over that, there's this cloud, which is the virus, which over the course of the series gets closer and closer and closer. But the title does that. The title is a judgment. And sometimes it's funny, but sometimes that's a real judgment. There are people to this day who say that virus is a judgment from God. And shame on them, that is the sin.
The huge injustice of AIDS, as we discussed in the episode 2 discussion, is how it seemed to unfairly target this segment of the population, especially because that it just felt like things were starting to open up, and acceptance was starting to really spread through society, and then it was all snapped shut by like this godly judgment of no, actually, gay people are going to get struck down.
When did you feel able to be out?
This is the 70s really, but I did belong to a very marvellous youth theatre in West Glamorgan that wasn't gay. No one would ever say the word gay out loud, but it was the gayest space imaginable. And so many of us did turn out to be gay. And that was far more important to me than school or anything. So it allowed us to be as gay as we possibly could be. It was campus Christmas. Oh my God. I mean, what you see in It's a Sin, that Pink Palace crowd with their little jokes and their little routines and stuff like that. That's me and my mates at age 18. Which is great. I'm so glad I had that. So you're going into like the 80s then. So then I went to university. And you just slowly start coming out. Spent a year saying I was bisexual, and then gradually kissing boys in secret and stuff like that. So just slowly easing out. When it came to my family, I mean, it's the 80s now, so things were getting better. And then, this is why I've written this drama, along comes the disease. It's such It's such a strange thing. You know, the law changed in 1967. So it takes that 10, 15 years for people to relax and start escaping the closet. And along comes a disease that apparently kills us. It was amazing. It was so strange. It felt like a door had been opened and the door had been slammed shut.
What's interesting about that to me is if we link it back to now, HIV is so treatable. Like, I don't know if you guys watched the After Hours Doctor Who Confidential-esque behind the scenes thing for the third episode, but in it, the actor for Donald, who played Richie's boyfriend in the episode, revealed he's HIV positive.
I'm HIV positive myself. I was diagnosed when I was 16. Colin's journey is like me sort of 20, 30 years ago. It's like where I would have been. Life with HIV now is fine. I'm really healthy. I'm the healthiest I've ever been. I take a tablet once a day. You know, I'm now what's called undetectable. So that means that I can't even pass HIV on to my sexual partners. And I'm going to live a long and healthy, happy life.
It's interesting to look back at the 80s in the show where it was like this godly judgment casting down gay people for sinning, you know, with their homosexuality, to now where even having HIV is like, it's not a death sentence. It's not even a sentence so much in the sense anymore that, you know, it can be so treatable.
That thing you were talking about like the godly judgment, it's extremely redolent of like the Dark Ages, you know, when people get diseases, they literally think they're getting smited by God. Just on the subject of like karmic forces, I think RTD again doing that incredible thing where he just has these tiny little ironies in the lines people say. Well, first you have Richie reading this play for his audition where he talks about like striking down a brother and I took his life so that new life may begin. That's obviously hugely evocative of like someone potentially passing on a sexually transmitted disease, and there's so many different meanings you could read into that. And then later on, the one that really hit me was when Richie talks about how Donald took the role that he was after and he says, "You stole my life." That's just obviously extremely hard-hitting based on what we know becomes of them as a couple. And all this like imagery of like medieval plays and like the French Revolution play that Jill is in, it's all very reminiscent of warfare and like combat. So it's like these gay characters are the unwitting participants in this massive war that causes them so much discord. And yeah, it's just very, very good evocative dialogue.
It's fascinating to me because the complexity of it is that even in, you know, 2021, where HIV is so much more treatable, and it's like the war you're describing has in some ways been won or is very close to being won, that doesn't actually map onto the social element of it so much, because like Russell T Davies has talked about how he has friends who, even though it's illegal, their HIV positive status gets things blocked in their life.
It's still ongoing. I think I'm always very wary about talking about it in the past tense. As I was saying before, there's still an awful lot of people who should get tested, and still an awful lot of prejudice. My friend trying to adopt 2 children recently, he's HIV positive. 3 times they brought that up in court, and that's illegal. It's nothing to do with his status as a parent, nothing to do with his role in adoption whatsoever. 3 times the social workers kept on bringing it up, and the lawyers were literally saying, "Stop it, stop it, stop it," and they wouldn't.
It's like what happened in this episode where those characters that were imprisoning Colin weren't even following the law, but it feels lawful because of biases in society, that illegal things will happen and get approved just because people's, you know, phobias and biases are what they are. So it's fascinating that even though we have this kind of triumph of science and medicine over Dark Ages style fear-mongering, it doesn't really map onto reality.
You know, interesting, you mentioned earlier that RTD talked about how it felt like things were just opening up, but then it was all snapped shut again. I think perhaps that helps kind of undercut this idea of like a linear like progress thing, or I think we called it, was it temporal exceptionalism when we were talking about years and years. This idea that like, well, things are just going to go up and up and up, and things will always get better. Like, I think it's maybe to some extent it's a reminder that things can always go backwards if like the social reality is not like, I don't know. Do you see what I mean?
In an interview with the BBC, Russell T Davies said something so connected to what you're saying now, and he said, "With every gay drama, I sit here absolutely convinced that the rights that we have are paper thin and could be lost at any moment. So don't tell me that we can relax on any laws, any freedoms that we have, any liberty. We have to be absolutely vigilant all the time, citing votes against same-sex marriage by the Home Secretary in 2013 and things like that. So yeah, this view of linear progress is so asinine, but it's so connected to the kind of ideologies that are prevalent in a lot of, you know, the countries watching this show, that it persists even for the fundamentally nonsensical nature of it.
In another interview, RTD basically rephrases that in a quote, which he attributes it to Tolstoy, but I couldn't actually find a source of Tolstoy saying it. But he basically said that revolutions have to continue happening. You know, it's not just like one boom and then everything's fine. It's a constant, ongoing process, which I thought was really good.
It's ironic considering that moment from Years and Years where her character says, well, if you go too far left wing, you just end up coming full circle.
With you not being able to find an attribution for Tolstoy actually saying something like that, what I would suspect has happened is Russell has mixed up two Russian names beginning with T, and he's half remembering at least the name of Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution, although the actual idea it's describing sounds more like Mao's idea of continuous revolution to me. But yeah,
I also think it's ironic that Years and Years, in the finale of that, the big sort of share this clip on Facebook moment was the speech about how what's wrong with the world is every individual person's fault and we're all to blame. And I think this show is so in the other direction. It's like this show has so much sympathy for individual actors. I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, the scenes of that play that with the guillotines and stuff that Jill, the French Revolution that Jill is in, I thought when opening the episode with that, the degree to which obviously that's about class warfare and stuff, and that's something that feels maybe muted a little bit inside the show. Like obviously there's a degree to which obviously it's there because the kind of the figures of menace in this episode, for example, are like these figures of authority and kind of the law and the ruling class, and maybe these like, and I don't know, maybe in the future we'll see like this closeted MP or something as well. But like I think it's interesting to have that there jostling alongside everything else. Like maybe the show doesn't seem to be like overtly about kind of this class warfare, like fuck the rich or anything. But it was an interesting note. Yeah.
I have a point that is extremely stupid and will date this discussion immediately.
No, please say it. Please say it.
With that horrible homophobic police officer talking to Colin's mum, when he says he's talking about the law and he says the law of the land forbids it. With that sort of high-minded pretentiousness, it reminded me of that the fake clerk from the Handful of Parish Council. Just that you have no authority here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anyway, 2021.
No, that's when we discuss Chris Chibnall's Born and Bred, I think that Handful of Parish Council thing will be a much more relevant example to compare to.
Oh boy.
But speaking of the very modern world, I think one of the really interesting things with It's a Sin is, of course, the show was entirely shot before the COVID-19 pandemic came down so hard upon the United Kingdom and everything.
That's on its way. No. We finished filming just before the lockdown.
But the show was filmed, therefore it was very much written before COVID-19 came to the fore. But of course, the way things turned out was that people are watching a show about a deadly virus while we're in, a new pandemic, a modern pandemic.
The world happens to have caught up with us in terms of viruses, but that's a very strange thing. It's very strange to listen to Radio 2 and hear people talking about the one great virus of their lifetimes. You sit there going, no, two. There's been two. So strange days.
Russell T Davies says it frustrates him when he sometimes sees COVID-19 described as like the virus of the modern age or the pandemic of the modern age, because he hates HIV kind of getting forgotten or swept under the rug, which the show deals with a lot. Look at Gloria's family in episode 2. So there are two great viruses of modern times. I think the connections, the differences, and the similarities between COVID-19 and HIV are really interesting and rich with the show, because it's such a fascinating coincidence how the show came out this way. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think certainly the element of denial that is so obviously present with COVID-19, and the fact that it's fortuitous that it plays such a role in this show. Like, even at the end of this episode, we have Richie not even willing to find out whether or not he has the virus, because he'd rather keep it in this Schrodinger's cat like state where he feels more comfortable just not knowing at all. Yeah, it is very, very, very interesting.
Well, bringing it back to that kind of class element, Gig was talking about the show not bringing to the fore heaps. In a discussion about the show, Russell T Davies and other people involved in the show were talking about similarities and differences with COVID-19 and with HIV. And what someone brought up was that...
And the answer to this might be no, but are there any parallels you could draw between what happened during the AIDS epidemic of the 80s and the current pandemic we're living through?
Well, yes, in that there are restrictions on people's lives. But I think other than that, everything was so different because Russell would say this better than me, but this is a pandemic that affects everyone, including non-gay, minority groups. Therefore, it's become, the impact of it and the response is so much bigger. It took so many years. AIDS was ignored for so many years and was purposefully ignored by every country around the world because they couldn't face it, whereas this has been tackled head on. So other than the fact that it happens to be a virus,
I think you still get people who are marginalised now. There's still niche groups. It's still the old rich white people in charge, and even now, I think you could see the same patterns recurring of the home counties being protected, and if you're on a minimum wage or no wage at all, you've had it. And it's the same process of marginalisation, weirdly.
I suppose that's an interesting distinction between COVID and HIV as well, in that, like, obviously when it comes to COVID, poor people, like, they have much less protection, like much less access to treatment, much less, all sorts of things. Like, whereas if the President of the United States gets it, he's almost guaranteed to be fine. Whereas, like, poor people and vulnerable people and old people, like, they're all dying of it in in droves. Whereas interestingly, with HIV, because it's sexually transmitted and it's something that kind of maybe, I'm not sure how to put this. I don't want to say, obviously, not to say that it doesn't discriminate by class, but like a rich, fancy, like, gay person who's like hiding it or whatever, they might contract HIV through sexual intercourse and then die of it. And like, because certainly at that time period of the show, it wasn't perceived as treatable. They'd be just as screwed as anyone else. So like, it's kind of maybe. So I guess it's. In some ways, it is kind of like more equal, but obviously in some ways it is not because of the the kind of gay kind of focus and stigma around it.
I guess at the time this particular episode is set, at least one very famous in the popular culture person had contracted HIV and died from it, which is Rock Hudson. And it's like, if someone who the pop culture recognizes and reveres, if he can be affected by it, and still people don't give a shit, then it's like, there doesn't seem to be much hope in that regard. And also in the Larry Kramer article that he wrote in I think it was 1983, he thought that the moment when people would start to care was when a baby or an infant contracted the disease and died from it. And that actually happened in the early 80s, but the baby was a Haitian. So it's still just, as long as it's not conforming to this straight white male adult, if it's not affecting those people, then no one is taking action.
It's like that thing of how the mistruth that HIV only affected gay men or was unique to gay men, it proliferates because of the causes already present in society, which are homophobia. Russell T Davies had a great quote to the Times where he says, "It was like everything that people said about you became true in the shape of a virus. We became a disease, we became ugly, we became wrong, dangerous and dirty." So I think it's terrible and fascinating how, a baby dying or women dying, because of course women were catching HIV as well, is just kind of pushed to the side because the narrative that's taken root in society at the time was that it was gay. Even if people weren't as apocalyptically religious as Roscoe's father to think it was an actual judgment from God, it conformed to their narratives around gay people, their homophobic narratives. And so the kind of fake news of the virus just spreads along those narratives that people already have, rooted into their minds. And I guess that's the interesting thing with COVID-19. in the modern days, Russell said, "You know, I look back and I don't know how we got any information in the 1980s about anything. You and I might complain about this internet world, but we can lay our hands on information quickly now. In the old days, how did we ever hear about anything?" And I just think that's an interesting contrast, that of course there's lies and mistruths and things that are very baked into constructed narratives, both in the 80s with HIV and now with COVID-19. But the difference is kind of the scale and scope and accessibility of information. But having more information accessible, of course, hasn't made the truth proliferate more and everyone believe the truth. You know, it's done the opposite in a lot of ways. So I guess that's just human nature, which is the thing Russell's good at writing about.
Yeah, it's weird, honestly, how watching the show and how with episode on episode, like Jill and the people in the hospitals and around like the world generally, like gradually the knowledge of what AIDS is seems to be becoming like sort of more mainstream, like more normal. Like, you know, in episode 1 they barely know what's going on, but in this one, you know, Jill can actually like provide like info and stuff, and like she can describe to Richie the way in which it, you know, weakens the body and lets other stuff in and stuff like that, and the way in which like knowledge seems to be increasing episode on episode, and comparing that to the present situation where like as the more time goes on, almost the more hopeless things seem, with people like in their droves just refusing to acknowledge it, and just, you know, governments, institutions still making an absolute mess of doing anything about it, and just the degree to which, I don't know, yeah, it feels ridiculous to say that the show seems more hopeful than the present day, but like, I don't know, there's an element to which, yeah.
It's just like this descent into insanity, at like the way they flip every permutation of this narrative they can, and like none of it maps onto any sort of reality. It's just like this desperation in people trying to cling on to the narratives that make sense to them. You know, no matter how much people die, you know, no matter how much scientific knowledge comes out. It's like, I think if anyone's ever played Metal Gear Solid 2,
boy, have I.
There's a great point about how so much information coming out doesn't have an effect of people learning more or getting closer to the truth of things. What it does is it overwhelms people. You stand in the aisle of a supermarket where there's 20 kinds of cereal there. You don't go, "Oh, this is great. All these options mean I can narrow down to precisely the one you want." You get choice paralysis. You go, "Holy shit, there are so many kinds of cereal. I don't know how to make a choice. How can I make a choice? There's too many possibilities for me to get it wrong. There's no narrative here for me to follow." I feel like the proliferation of information does this thing where narratives, you know, including very dishonest ones, are easier sold to us now because we're so overwhelmed by the scale and scope of information that it's just too much for us. So we need some kind of narrative to cling on to, even if the narrative is completely incomprehensible and makes no sense and doesn't really map onto reality at all. We just don't have the time or the inclination or the energy afforded to us to research everything in life to come to an informed worldview, and therefore people are more inclined to cling on to dishonest narratives just because we need narratives, because there is so much information at such easy accessibility now that the world is too confusing and multipolar for people to understand.
That resonates really interestingly with just that little snippet we get of what Stephen Fry's character is talking about on the TV. It's like something kind of mundane, like opening a highway or something that will basically increase England's competitiveness in the global stage or whatever. But it seems to be clearly signaling like the rise of Thatcherism and sort of the UK becoming like a marketplace-driven, opportunistic economy. So I think that maps on interestingly to what you were just describing.
I think it maybe highlights like another one of the big contrasts with COVID and HIV is that, like, I think COVID is more of a problem to capitalism as like a global like economic whole, whereas HIV, certainly at the time period of the show is set, it's picking off these undesirables of society. You know, it's getting rid of these people who don't fit into the societal like paradigm. So like it's not some huge thing that like paralyzes the planet. It's just something that's kind of being tucked away, whereas, you know, in the present day, obviously, because this phenomenon is causing such huge problems for like global institutions and stuff, it's something that everyone is in denial about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's an element to it of like what HIV could say to people was, you know, being gay is bad. Look, all the gay people are dying from a gay disease. This is the truth that HIV offers to us now. But with COVID-19, if you look at the countries that are suffering more under from it, it's offering, if someone wants to take it super literally and reductively, you know, it's like saying these so-and-so countries, which have certain things in common, are having so many people die, and these other very different countries, run very differently, are having the opposite happen. How on earth can we reconcile this with our way of life being better, or our style of government being better? And I think that's why you get these explosions of bizarre narratives, is because whereas what HIV was supposedly proving was, you know, basically being gay is bad, you know, if COVID-19 is like saying the American government is bad or the UK government is bad, that's not a point of view, you know, that a lot of American and English institutions are going to want to uphold. And so you get these strange narratives that start proliferating through the media to try and assure people, yes, we have more people dying. Yes, by maybe more simple assessments of the data, it might look like we're handling it worse than so-and-so. But actually, and, you know, and then comes the Metal Gear Solid 2-esque narrative that tries to make sense of that in a way that people can continue believing in the supremacy of whatever they're believing. So I guess it just comes down to what's on the line. With HIV, what was on the line is, you know, the reputation and the health and livelihood of gay people. With COVID-19, it's at a much more national stage. You know, it's about how different countries run different things differently. And so I think that goes some way to explaining the difference in narratives across the two different epidemics, in my opinion. Was that too hot of a take?
No, it was really good.
I'm just sort of digesting it.
Well, to shift gears into a very different narrative at play in the media right now, there's been some controversy around comments Russell T Davies has made about what he identifies as the importance of casting gay actors as gay characters, at least for this show of his. This debate about gay actors and straight actors really evolved out of an interview with the Radio Times where Russell T Davies said, and this is a real quote, despite what the first sentence may sound like, he said, "I'm not being woke about this, but I feel strongly that if I cast someone in a story, I am casting them to act as a lover, or an enemy, or someone on drugs, or a criminal, or a saint. They are not there to act gay. Because acting gay is a bunch of codes for a performance. It's about authenticity, the taste of 2020. You wouldn't cast someone able-bodied and put them in a wheelchair. You wouldn't black someone up. Authenticity is leading us to joyous places." People reacted as you would expect there, because he's suggesting, I mean, he's talking in the context of this show where, you know, the director of all 5 episodes is gay, where the actors playing gay roles are, you know, they're not heterosexual, where, of course, Russell T Davies himself is a gay man, Phil Collinson, producer, is a gay man. He's talking in context of this show, why it lends authenticity to the program for him, because it's a show about gay men in the 1980s. So, and authenticity is such a huge overriding focus of the show. But of course, when you suggest straight actors shouldn't play gay roles, people are going to react to that.
So I would happily defend that position. I'm sorry if I do think this program is about HIV and AIDS, and there are experts who work in the field of HIV and AIDS who would die to be on Loose Women in a slot like this. So I'm sorry if that has upstaged it slightly. And also, genuinely never meant to upstage actors who play straight actors. It's the system I was looking at, and just, this is the way I've run this show. And it's my job to look for something new, to make things in a new way, and to try and find new ways to do things. And I'm very, I would really say, come along, look at this show. I think it's got an energy. I think it's got a uniqueness. Maybe it works. Maybe not. I might be wrong.
The one thing I wanted to ask you about, though, just to get a bit of clarity, is a headline that I read about you saying that if you wouldn't cast non-gay people in gay roles. Is that? I mean, is that fair? Is that your view?
Oh, it's as fair it can be. I mean, that's me now in 2021. I loved it when I said that, because I made that theory about my own work, how I like to work, and strangely, all the straight male commentators lined up to tell me off. Can you believe that, Steph? Straight men telling you how to live your life. What a puzzle that was. What a surprise.
Yeah.
And marvelous. That was it was debated a lot, and actually then the program went on air, and I've got to say the debate has kind of stopped, because people could see what I meant. There is an entirely gay and queer cast doing their stuff, and I think it shines off the program. I think it rises off the screen. I think there's an energy. I absolutely believe it. And it's my job to believe these things.
Yeah.
It's my show.
But
I will believe it about what I create, and I think we did a great thing. And I'm so proud of that cast. I mean, aren't they good?
The cast are phenomenal. But do you not think my worry would be that does that mean that gay people shouldn't be cast in straight roles?
No, because it's not equal. It's like there's 100 straight actors, there's 2 gay actors. There's 100 straight parts, there's 2 gay parts. So it's not a seesaw. It's not even. That seesaw's not moving. It's stuck. It's stuck in the straight weight. They own the playground. So that will never happen. And frankly, if we do get gay actors to play straight parts, we've been pretending to be straight since the age of 11. We learned to walk in that. We fit in with everyone else. The only other straight person's like, come to us.
But what do you guys think of this, what Russell T Davies is saying here with gay actors and straight actors and gay roles?
Well, okay, I have to say, I think I more or less agree with his sentiment. I think it's especially interesting, his comments about how it's like the flavour of 2020. It's, again, that thing of him understanding that the like, we're not in a bubble of time and things could go back and forth, and he acknowledges that it could be different in like 10 years and whatever. So he's sort of like ascended to a 4th dimensional being in that sense. But I think like the key is that in 2020, and actually so long before this, since pretty much cinema was a thing, like people care about the actors who appear in films and television, and they're aware of the actors as distinct people. And so like, I think people who come to a show like It's a Sin, I don't think it's unreasonable for them to expect the people playing these characters to act as role models sort of unto themselves. I think like it's a sort of material benefit, I think, for you know, it's representation. Again, it's seeing people like yourself on screen, and that could potentially inspire someone to go into a profession or whatever. And just like on the authenticity point, I think, again, it's a question of sort of the limits of empathy. And that's a concept that gets talked about a lot in relation to like writing, in that the empathy can only go so far, and you can find a sort of common human experience with everyone, but you can't really in good faith just place yourself in someone's shoes, because that always ends up informed by sort of your own personal circumstances and the way you were brought up and everything. And I think that applies to acting as well. And like, I agree with him that it is a set of codes, because in like Queer as Folk, for example, the actors in that show, they will have like character walks that they've made up, and, you know, hand gestures and things of that nature. And sure, you could say that they're just embodying like real parts of a culture that exists, being gay culture, but also it's like, that's literally the thing that homophobes have done for eons, to demean and, you know, make fun of gay people, the whole limp-wristed blah 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 act. And so I think it can be awkward when like that sort of intrudes on a legitimate gay drama, or just a drama that has gay people in it. And like, I just watched the film version of the Larry Kramer Normal Heart play, and Mark Ruffalo, a straight actor, plays the lead in that. And poor Mark Ruffalo, he didn't actually want to play the role, but Ryan Murphy sort of press-ganged him into it. But Ruffalo is forced to like say negative things about the gay community as a straight actor. And in that film, he's doing like the whole sort of vaguely flamboyant walk, and it's like, I don't know how comfortable I am with it, just like with my knowledge of sort of how homophobia is exacted. But yeah, that's basically my feelings on the matter.
In terms of actors' comments, I think it's worth talking about Neil Patrick Harris, who did an interview with The Times about It's a Sin, and this topic was brought up to him, what Russell T Davies said. And what Neil Patrick Harris said was, "I'm not one to jump on labelling. As an actor, you certainly hope you can be a visible option for all kinds of different roles. I played a character in How I Met Your Mother for 9 years who was nothing like me. Of course, this was an extremely heterosexual character. But he says also that in our worlds that we live in, you can't really, as a director, demand that an actor be gay or straight. Who's to determine how gay someone is?" I think Russell T Davies was speaking more about the joyfulness of being able to be authentic. A side note with that, it is fascinating how Russell T Davies and Andy Pryor, the casting director, managed to get all these actors fitting, these LGBT actors for these parts. It kind of almost makes me think of, you know how in the first episode Neil Patrick Harris's character comments on how the boss of the clothing store knows how to pick them, like he knows how to identify gay men to hire, and that's how we got Colin. Yeah, I wonder if Andy Pryor and Russell T Davies have a sense like that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a question mark how they do determine, because I think Russell T Davies has gone on record as saying that he back when he made Queer as Folk, he didn't believe that you should be able to ask actors in auditions whether they're gay or straight, and I think he's right on that, and he still believes that.
Are you a gay man in this?
Yeah.
And you're a straight man in real life?
Yeah.
Have you found any? How do you turn yourself into your gay character? Is there anything you kind of throw in there? Do you think?
I listen to a lot of opera. No. I mean, basically, it's playing a character, and you know, you might play a murderer, but you don't have to murder someone.
Okay, now the casting of the show, we're told that all the main actors are straight.
Yep.
Okay, now is that a kind of course you chose to go down, or is it?
No, you wouldn't choose that. And for all I know, they go and have a quick shag with a man behind our backs. I don't know. You know, who knows what anyone does? But you can't have someone walk into audition and say, "Are you gay or straight?" You just look for the best actor.
Yeah.
And that's literally it. You get them to read it. We never sat there and said, "Are you gay or are you straight?" It's probably illegal.
I also think, it's the idea of like addressing an imbalance, and I think that's very legitimate. That's a legitimate concern, and like hopefully in 20 or 30 years, after we have more of a concrete record of sort of openly gay actors acting as gay characters and things, then hopefully it starts to become less of an issue. But yeah, I don't know. It's a thorny issue, but yeah, it's one I think that RTD's recent points have a lot of legitimacy.
I think when it comes to a show by a gay man, one that is celebrating gay men to such an extent and is so about them and such a tribute to them, like obviously it makes complete sense to involve actual gay people in performing in it and making in it. Like, to object to that would, I think, be lunacy, right? And I think I think maybe optically the bit that RTD went into when he compared it to blacking up and maybe putting an able-bodied actor in a wheelchair, I think perhaps optically he might have done better to avoid those comparisons. I think the main obvious reason being that, like, for example, a black actor, is not going to get the chance to play a white character, because that's a privilege that they do not have, whereas, and so that makes the fact that white people do something so egregious as paint themselves black to take over those black characters, that makes that so much worse of like an insult and an injustice, and whereas, gay people have obviously, as we talked about earlier, gay people are such masters of playing straight people, for not just in acting but also in real life, like, so that's kind of an area that they can go into. So it's not quite as like brutal of like a punishment that like straight people can maybe go the other direction. But obviously at the same time, it's like when you have maybe like an industry that's still not outgrown homophobia, the fact that and you say, like, I think, for example, there was a while back, there was controversy over like the first gay character in like a Disney film being some camp cliche. I think it's the fact that when you have an environment that is still excluding of like gay actors, like to have like the straight people kind of filling in for it, it's like continuing the exclusion to some extent. Whereas if you have a more like rich environment of gay actors, gay characters and stuff around, it's like maybe not as bad, if you see what I mean.
I don't know if this is the film you're referring to, but what still I can't believe this happened. It's such a surreal glitch in the Matrix moment. In the best-selling film of all time, Avengers Endgame, there's a gay character in it, and he's like in a support group meeting, and he talks about his husband or something. And what it is, it's one of the two directors of the film who's, married to a woman that's that's playing this like bit part gay character, and then like some people lauded the film for like the gay representation, breaking boundaries of Marvel movies by including a gay character. And it's like, it just makes me realize how far we have to go when something as incredibly insane as that has happened.
And of course it was a character whose partner had died, of course, just to add another cliche onto the pile.
Yeah. What I'd love to do is, rather than shy away from Russell T Davies cancellation adjacent stuff, like what Gig was talking about with the race comparison, I'd love to jump on that a bit more. Because in this interview with The Times, I often come back to, Russell T Davies says, "I know what the response will be to the show because we live in 2020. The response is going to be, well, what about the women who died? What about the lesbians who died? What about the children who died? What about the Africans? And I'm, Russell T Davies, rolling my eyes, thinking, yes, okay, I accept that. But if I'd written that, they'd say only a lesbian could write that, only an African could write that. He capsizes into gusts of laughter. So these days, there's simply no winning. Well, I just ignore that, having written about a Time Lord going to Mars. And then the interviewer writes, for a fleeting moment, I think Russell T Davies is about to pick a fight with woke culture warriors. But in the very next breath, he applauds their activism for pioneering these debates. Yeah, thoughts on that comment?
In It's a Sin, you can sort of see RTD's sort of, I guess you could call it fence-sitting position. That makes it sound negative. I think he's probably quite wise in this respect, that like when you look at it through the prism of the character of Roscoe is a very well-written character with a very good and complex arc. But if you just break it down in terms of screen time, I think he is pretty much the least focused on out of Colin Ritchie and Roscoe. And I think it's because like RTD, if he were to write a show that focused singularly on the experiences of Roscoe, it would kind of beg the question of like, well, what does RTD really know about this being raised in that environment? And wouldn't this be better written by, you know, someone who is has more personal investment in you know, growing up in a religious fundamentalist family? I mean, I don't know RTD's exact background, but
he wrote a Time Lord going to Mars, so he can write anything.
But I think like from that we can see that RTD is very willing to write experiences that are outside of his milieu, but he also doesn't make them central. Like the lead character of this, Richie, I'm sure has far greater parallels to Russell T Davies' own life, just in terms of his identity and yeah.
Gig, what do you think of that extended comment?
I think, like, RTD, at the end of the day, I think... Yeah, his comment there where he sort of, like, flipped over and then kind of went to sort of praising them for starting the debates and stuff, it reminded me of Moffat, weirdly. Like, that thing of being, privileged and being kind of cancelable, but kind of also conceding to, like, the woke warriors and whatever for cancelling him, and kind of like, oh, yeah, you know, I defer to their authority and stuff. It's kind of, there's something... it's hard to say, because obviously we love RTD. He's a great writer. He's really good. And obviously he's not like, we're not like condemning him or anything. But it's interesting because obviously he's white. Like that's the thing, and he's kind of and he's gonna do stuff that's about white people, like mostly, and it's like, and about men and stuff, and I don't know, I guess it's kind of a means by which, like, it's... I'm glad that he didn't go on some rant about, those social justice warriors cancelling my superior intellect or whatever. But, at the same time, it's, like, it's maybe not acknowledging the fact that, like, at the end of the day, the fact that he's writing this is, like, also an expression of the fact that, you know, he's this white dude and he's got, like, the privilege to make shows about other white dudes and stuff, and it's, like... You know, this is not the only possible reality. You know, there's some other writer out there who could write something else, something completely different. And it's like, we kind of, I think, when a writer says like, oh, well, you know, I can only write this, so I wrote something else, people would cancel me. It's like, kind of like, it's omitting the possible realities where other writers exist or could write things. It's kind of like, and obviously we don't want to like, you don't want to sort of shit on someone's like, career or dreams or whatever. Like, obviously it's cool that RTD writes stuff. We love him. He's great. I guess it's just like, it's something that we just kind of have to deal with, I guess, the way it's shaken out. Like with, I don't really know where to go with this.
No, I think what it is it's like when Russell is talking about casting gay actors in straight parts, he's almost talking more of an institutional thing, because he's like saying there are so many more straight parts and there are so many more straight actors, that it's not like he's singling out, someone and tortured and going, it was so messed up I cast a heterosexual actor in a, bisexual role. Man, do I hate them now. Man, do I wish I could have done that. There's no personal attack or targeting what he's saying. It's like a more generalized observation. I think when it comes to Russell T Davies writing, experiences he wouldn't have had in his life, it's not like we're targeting Russell T Davies specifically. It's more just like a consequence of the institutional makeup of like the TV writer world, the state of television in Britain. It's nothing to do with Russell personally so much. It's just that the fact that there are, so many white writers making TV shows means, of course, these criticisms come to the fore. And it's not like we're going to Moffat and going, I wish you weren't getting the money to make a show when someone else was getting it. It's just like a more generalized observation that if the industry was had more different kinds of voices telling different kinds of stories, we probably wouldn't be having these criticisms about Russell T Davies, in the first place, because there wouldn't be that institutional need for them or the way they're catered to come up in society.
Perhaps he wouldn't be bringing up blacking up in the conversation.
Yeah. I think part of, as far as It's a Sin goes, this potential criticism of Russell T Davies, writing about the lesbians or African people in possibly insensitive ways, at least on the back of that blacking up comment, I think it's inhibited by the fact he got 5 episodes. And we'll talk a lot about the episode order when we come to discussing the finale. But he's made a comment that he could have done 100 episodes of the show.
There were so many stories. I could have written 100 episodes about this. So it's simply a powerful story.
Because there were so many interesting parts of the period that he could have covered. Like he could have covered more of the contributions of nurses, or how it all started up through West End, choir boys disappearing. He could have covered, more of the African experience in Britain at the time. But because he got that smaller episode order from Channel 4, it kind of brought out the best in him, I think, because it means he was writing about stuff he knew more specifically. He was writing more about people like him in terms of Richie and Colin, or people he knew very well, like Jill. So I think the smaller episode order did him some favors, and that it forced him to concentrate just on stuff he would be very knowledgeable about. If he had gotten that 100 episode order he talked about, I think there would be perhaps more to criticize.
To pivot it slightly back to like this episode, I really like the idea that, just on the subject of gay characters and gay actors, I like the idea that Richie is not a great actor. Like, I don't want to sound too harsh, but just from his auditions and stuff, I think it would have been easy to have been like, he would have been the next Laurence Olivier or whatever, but he's just he's okay. And I think there's also a tragic dimension to it as well, because like there's this moment in this episode where he's on the phone to his mother, and he insists that Jill is not his girlfriend, but then he hedges that statement a little bit by saying, maybe someday, and it's just not convincing at all. So he's kind of tragically, he's not really that great at being in the closet, I think that's an interesting layer to his character.
It comes back, we discussed it in our discussion of the first episode, but I think it comes back to this thing that Russell T Davies wants to celebrate. The unexceptional, God, that sounds terrible. The normal people of the 1980s, the normal people that might have caught HIV, or just the normal gay people at the time. He is much more interested in celebrating that than celebrating the scientist who solved so-and-so, or the greatest actor of the time who this and this happened to them. It's much more interesting to celebrate and to depict the lives of the very normal people. So yeah, I like that quality that Richie isn't, the most amazing actor in the world. I think that makes his experience and his story more interesting, to get an insight into the life of like a very regular kind of British actor. Who knows what show he might appear on next?
Yeah, the idea that gay people are inherently like great at acting, like at the end of the day, it's just another cliche, isn't it? Like it's not actually, doesn't capture the nuanced reality. Although it was interesting that his last audition, when he's like doing that very emotional scene, like after the point in which he's suddenly worried that he might have HIV and Colin's dying and everything's kind of going to pieces around him, he seemed perhaps more emotionally truthful after that one. Almost like the confrontation of like his own mortality potentially is kind of, I don't know, is coming out in his performances. I don't know, but I don't know if that's going anywhere at all. But it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. On the subject of like really pointedly ironic lines, there's the moment after they all get tested, and Richie gets a phone call saying, like off screen, that he got the part, and he introduces that by saying like, I got it, and it's kind of this strange parallel between like, I've got the disease, I've got this part. I don't even know what that signifies. If that's just a really cruel touch by Russell, maybe it signifies like Richie's sort of still dominated by his own ego at this point in the series, but if it was even intentional.
That scene where they all got tested was fascinating, because I thought for sure that, like, I don't know, the fact that both Ash and Roscoe were tested, like, negative, and they seemed, like, free of it, and then with Richie kind of as well, and that sort of the fact that they leave it kind of not quite answered whether or not he has it as well. I was quite surprised because I thought, when we go into that scene, it seems like I might be building up to some doom where like, oh no, we've all got the virus, we're going to die. But the fact that we also see two of the characters being like told that they're clear of it, and obviously Ross goes in utter disbelief because he says, oh, I've had everyone. The fact that it's again, it's like the light and shade, I guess. The fact that it's not necessarily like it, rather than like it being like a completely straight line march towards doom for all the characters. It's like the fact that it makes it more like impactful that Richie is the one who might have it. I think it's interesting how RTD doesn't make the obvious narrative decision, but rather he makes the one that provides more tension and more excitement, I guess, for future episodes.
And I think Roscoe's reaction to learning that he doesn't have it was sort of heartbreaking in its own way. Like, he almost seems like he can't believe that he doesn't have it, and in a weird way, like, he feels like, why don't I have it? Like, he's sort of distraught that he's still around, because I mean, I guess there's some emotions of self-loathing there, but that was a really good touch. When
he says it's unfair, it's like that sort of captures the whole thing, isn't it? Because the whole situation is unfair, like in so many different ways. I mean, no, I'm good. I'm willing to let you guys do spoiler zone now.
Yeah, that was great, Gig. We'll talk episode 4 with you next time.
Yep, farewell. Have fun.
Bye-bye.
And now we come to our third Sin Spoiler Zone, where we discuss episode 3 in context of all 5 episodes of the series. So there will be spoilers for episode 4 and episode 5, the finale. What spoilery observations do you have, Tom?
Just one, and it was one that came up sort of organically while we were talking about it just now. It was that Colin's sort of losing control in front of Richie. That ends up sort of being reenacted in the following episode, episode 4, when Richie sort of overshares to his old childhood friend his attraction to him, and it quickly borders into inappropriate. So I thought that was an interesting parallel, because obviously Richie at that point still has control over his own mind. It's entirely emotionally driven for him. It's just like this outpour of emotion that had been covered up before. And so it comes out in a really sort of harmful and ungraceful way.
I think the series has a few things like that where scenes kind of reflect each other in pointed ways. Like this episode does with Neil Patrick Harris's character in the hospital in episode 1. We get the same sort of setup with Colin in the hospital in this one. I think it just comes down to it being 5 episodes and Russell T Davies being, a writerly kind of writer, that we get parallels in that kind of sense. Some spoilery observations that came to me while we were talking with Gig were, the first one, Gig pointed out how Colin's mother only reacts to the danger her son is in, and not the revelation that he's gay or anything like that in the scene with the cop. How parents act in times of crisis is interesting. Of course, we can connect this to episode 5 where Clive / Richie's dad amazingly doesn't really react to the revelation his son is gay so much. He just cares so much that his son is in trouble that he wants to scour the disease out of him. He goes into total protective, loving mode. So it's very interesting how parents act in times of crises.
And also the fact that Colin's mother does get involved in the AIDS activism a little bit. This discussion, I found myself sort of having to withhold things from Gig more, maybe because some of the subplots in this episode are really set up, but maybe he'll be pleased with how the class stuff comes into it with the bringing Thatcher in, even though that's really quite a sort of almost farcical expression of it. But yeah.
On the note of Colin and Richie parallels again, Colin being freed from hospital and being happy to, live out his days with his family and friends is interesting, because with Richie we get a fascinating variation on this, where he's in secret from his family that he has AIDS, and he's kind of working through it with his friends, trying to get past it. He's really trying to beat it, like he says at the end of episode 4. And then, of course, his parents take him, and it's like him having his fun days with his family becomes this kind of horrifying thing in a way, because it's like he's trapped and he doesn't have access to his friends, and his mum is in this kind of reality denial stage.
Yeah.
So it's just fascinating how times with one's mother can be so different, especially if Russell T Davies is writing your mother character.
Yeah, it's like the reveal. The sort of reveal is that the sense of incarceration and being institutionalized does not just end like in a hospital, because Richie is totally imprisoned in his sort of suburban little bubble at the end of the series. Yeah, it's quite horrific.
Towards the end of our main discussion, that point was raised of Roscoe like being like, why don't I have the disease?
Yeah.
I think that's interesting when it comes to something Jill says in a huge speech to Valerie in the final episode. It's how a lot of gay men in the hospitals with AIDS, they have that element of self-loathing and absorption of like society's prejudices where they're like, this is correct. It's correct that I'm dying of AIDS because, you know, I'm gay.
Yeah.
And it's that reinforcement of like societal narratives we were talking about earlier in the episode, the narrative of homophobia. So it's interesting just to see that expressed through a fortunate Roscoe not having HIV, but there's like that seed, because society was so homophobic, certainly at the time then, that of course there'll be some internalized, if not outright homophobia, then like wonderment at why don't I have it? I'm meant to have it. I'm gay.
Yeah.
So it's a sad note.
Definitely. I mean, you can't fault the series for being like a very unified thing. Like none of this feels made up as they go along. It all feels the beginning reflects the end and the end reflects the beginning. It's very, very tightly written. Very fractal. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm quite excited about our next discussion since, you know, we're all big Doctor Who fans. The next episode has that glorious Doctor Who scene. So that'll be interesting to discuss. Let's make sure we talk about that the whole time and not reference anything else that happens.
Much to say.